Hey everybody, so now we're looking at planning the audit. So we're going to get into the nitty gritty really. And there's two reasons why to plan an audit. First reason is, and the most important, well kind of the most important anyway, is we want to reduce audit risk, okay? Audit risk, the risk that we give the wrong opinion, that we say the accounts do show a true and fair view when actually they don't, okay? And so we need to plan to focus on the risky areas, on the areas where we may make a mistake, the areas where we need to concentrate on to make sure we get good evidence for so we don't make a mistake. So we need to focus on the risky areas. The other reason why we plan is in order to increase the quality of our audit, which therefore, of course, will reduce the audit risk. Now, how do we go about increasing this quality? Well, we need to make sure then we do this by getting the right team involved, the right team with the right amount of experience, the right amount of skills, the right amount of training, at the right costs as well. We need to make sure that the audit is effective and efficient. We need to make sure that we identify potential problems up front. So any areas that we think, we need to get certain information that might be quite difficult to get, let's make sure we understand that at the beginning. And finally, let's create a timetable then, so we understand what resources are needed, the client understands when we're going to be there, etc. So all those things will help improve the quality of the audit. How do we go about doing this then? Well, in order to focus on the risky areas, we need to know what those risky areas are. And to do that, we do what's called a risk assessment. And we look at that in more detail later. Okay, how do we go about improving the quality? Well, we said we needed a right team. So therefore, we need to select the team appropriately. That's how we plan. We need to make sure the audit is effective. We need to know that it identifies potential problems. So actually what we need to do is we need to develop a strategy, and we'll see this developing a strategy in more detail in a second. Okay, and then we need to create a timetable and identify problems. Well, to do that, we will outline the procedures, and we'll look at that in a bit more detail when we do our detailed plan. Okay, so I want you to understand the difference between a strategy and a plan. A strategy is the scope, the direction of the audit. The plan is the nitty-gritty details, the procedures that we need to follow. And the final thing that you would do is you would need to set materiality in order to do some planning. And just in case you're not sure, when we have an audit, we say that the audit shows a true and fair view and that there's no material misstatements, no material mistakes. And material just means no mistakes above a certain figure. What is that certain figure? Well, that's what we've got to set at the start. We have to set this materiality level, and we look at how we do that later. So that's why we plan and how we plan. Now I want to go into a bit more detail though about the difference between a strategy and a plan. It's okay saying develop a strategy or outline procedures, but how do you actually do those? Okay, so let me help you out then. So first of all, we will probably create a strategy document. Okay, and in that strategy document, we will have things to do with understanding the entity, understanding our client. Okay, the reason why we do this is because we need to lower audit risk. Okay, if we understand the entity that we're about to audit, there's less risk that we'll get things wrong because we understand them better. Then what the document does is then it looks at, well, how do I actually go about doing that logistically, and what approach am I going to take? Okay, so they're the three things that I want you to think of when we have a strategy document. So, what goes into it? Well, to understand the entity, we need to understand the industry that they're in. And we do that using Pestel. Okay, Pestel, we need to have a look. Are there any political aspects that may be affecting this industry either now or in the future? Will a change of government affect this industry? What sort of performance is the industry having? Are they going into recession? Is it a booming industry? What are the stakeholders? How important are they? What do they want? What's the effect on society from our industry? Are there any technological changes that we need to know about? If it's fast moving, will stock be obsolete? Will our business as a whole be obsolete? Environmental things are becoming more and more important. Are we on the right side of that? Do we have regulations to follow? Okay, linked to the last one then, legal regulations. Now they're all outside things that will help us understand the business because they're the industry that it's in. We've got to understand then the business itself. Okay, so the business itself, we're looking therefore at the management. We're looking at the management skills. We're looking at the management integrity. If we can rely on those, then we know the audit's going to be more efficient. If we can't, we need to know about that early and therefore do more testing. We need to know about, are there any related parties? Are there any related parties? We need to know about those because they can affect the figures and we need to make sure they're disclosed properly. We need to understand systems and controls. If we're going to audit something, we need to understand how the system works and what controls are behind those systems. We need to know, have they trained their staff appropriately? Because we can have the best controls in the world, but if our staff aren't trained properly, then the controls won't work. We will need to do some analytical reviews. All analytical reviews are, at the start, is basically comparing this year to last year. Have sales gone up? Has debt gone up? Have we issued shares? Let's compare this year to last year and let's do something a bit more in depth. Well, if sales have doubled, have costs doubled? They should do. If they haven't, then that's an area that we need to go focus on to find out why. So that would help us do some planning. We'd also need to understand what the accounting policies are. If they've changed accounting policies, then the figures will change. We need to make sure that they've done that properly. Okay, moving on then to the logistics. First of all, we need to know the scope. Remember we said strategy is all to do with the scope and direction. Are we going to use IASs? Are we going to use local GAAP or IFRSs? Do we have any listed company requirements? Okay, for that particular country. Let's work out what it is that we need to judge this company against. Then we need to look at timing. We need to say, look, is there an interim audit that we need to do? Is there a final audit? What timetables have we got for there? Linked to that is we need to know the locations at the planning stage. When are we going to visit those locations? Do we have the resources to visit those locations? Let's work out those resources, and let's also, as we said, this is vital, to set materiality, and that will all be documented in this strategy document. Then you say, right, the approach we'll follow will be a risk-based one, that we're going to focus on the most risky areas. So we are going to do additional work on those risky areas and we will highlight where those risky areas are. We will also say that we've looked at fraud and the possibility of the fraud impact, and we'll say, look, we also want a management representation that they have tried to detect any risk of fraud. So that's all the strategy document. Finally, though, we need to do this detailed plan, don't we? So let's go down and let's do this detailed planning. Okay, so the plan. The more details, strategy, scope and direction, plan the details, okay? And what you've got to basically plan are the procedures. What procedures are you going to follow? And all you need to think about is, in the detailed plan, who's going to do those procedures? Who's going to look at debtors? Who's going to look at whatever particular tests are? How many? Because you've set materiality and your sample size, how many are you going to test? We're also going to say when we are going to test them, okay? And how many, of course, will be linked to our risk assessment again. Okay, so that's basically it. That's what you need to remember for audit. Think about why we audit, think about how we audit, think about what a strategy document what goes into one, and think about planning, the development, the how, the who, and the when. Okay, see you on the other side.